Welcome to a new episode of the Tolkien Experience podcast. I'm Luke Shelton.
I'm Sarah Westvik.
And I'm Sarah Brown.
Each episode, we share with you an interview of a Tolkien scholar or fan.
That's right. In these interviews, one of us asks our guests to respond to 6 questions that help us learn about their personal Tolkien experience.
All of this is made possible by our supporters on Patreon. So we want to thank them and encourage you to check out the community at patreon.com/Tolkien Experience.
We are so excited to share this podcast with you. So without any more delay, let me introduce our guest. This is an extra special episode of the Tolkien Experience podcast because, as you can probably tell from the new introduction, it is our first episode with our newest host, Sarah Westvik. Since it's their first episode with us, Sarah and I thought it would be nice to just give you a couple of insights into their Tolkien experience. So here are just a couple of questions with Sarah before we jump into the actual interview for this episode. So why don't you go ahead and tell us, how were you introduced to Tolkien?
So I was introduced to Tolkien when I was 6 years old by my mother. She had been introduced to the books by a friend of hers in Denmark like 30 years before. And then when she had me, she realized that I was really interested in the Narnia books. I had started reading Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, so she thought, I think maybe I can introduce Tolkien to this child as well. So she started with the films because they had all been released by then, 2004, so they were all out. So watched the films. Me and my sister were really captivated. And so then, she told me there's a book, and my mind was just blown because I was a very bookish little child. So she got me a copy of The Hobbit. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Wow. So you started with the films and then went into the books?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It was like my mom had, she picked them up on CD and DVD. And was just like, we had this tradition of after dinner, like watching like shows and watching like films. So she had put them on one night. And like, I don't know, it was just something about like I think the essence of the storyline was captured really well in the films, like the thematic element of the stories. And the music was one of the big things that drew me in, because that's like, it's probably the main way that I've engaged in Tolkien as well ever since. But it was also the first thing that kind of like got to me, because it created the whole like atmosphere of Middle Earth, and like the fact that, that kind of existed made me want to explore it further. And that's how I got into the reading the books. And then, yeah.
I have to say that I agree. The music of the movies is just something that, even when I'm reading the books, I'll play that in the background just to give it an extra bit of ambiance. It's something that I don't know why, but it seems like no one ever feels like the music conflicts with their interpretation of Middle Earth.
I personally think that it's because there's this sense that Shore has been able to do with the piece, because when you look at it as a whole, it really does sort of read as a tone poem from Middle Earth. It's just an entire illustration of the landscape, of the essence of the language. The fact that it's so imbued with the language is, I think, one of the main things that ties it so directly to Middle Earth without ascribing any particular feeling to it beyond that. And the wide variety of like influences that Howard Shore had. I mean, I'm a music nerd, so Douglas Adams's book, The Music of the Lord of the Rings, it's so good, and it dives into all the different ways that Shore put the score together. But I think what he managed to do because of that was to essentially make Middle Earth take on a life of its own, a sort of like independent existence that belongs squarely in the movies, of course, but it can also exist outside of the movies. It can exist in concert with the books, in concert with artwork that's produced, in concert with transformative works that people create. Like, I think like that's a really wonderful sort of his own kind of sub-creation that he did with that score.
Yeah, I like that perspective a lot.
That's my theory.
So I know that the way that we met was at a Tolkien Society event. And I know that, but just kind of based on reputation, you've been involved with the Tolkien Society for a little while now. Can you tell us how you went from reading the books to the first time to then getting involved with the Tolkien Society?
Well, it sort of it coalesced because I'd read the books a long time ago when I was a kid, and I was sort of in and out of fandom in the years after that. Never really like heavily involved. I didn't really, produce anything. I didn't really talk to people, but I would read content. I would go onto like fan sites, that kind of thing. But then in 2016, I moved to Europe from Singapore. It was my first time living abroad. It was a big move, across like 2 continents. So I was kind of like at the stage where like I wanted to connect with people again. I didn't have an existing like support group really to fall back on, and I started to get more involved with online fandom. And I started to, look at opportunities to engage with fandom in real life, because I figured, okay, Europe, there's probably a stronger tradition of Tolkien societies, whether, the official one or otherwise, that didn't really exist in Asia yet. And of course, like UK, Norway, it's like a 4-hour flight. It's something you could feasibly, if you can save out the money, you could do it for like, a long weekend, Oxenmoot weekend. And that's kind of like how I started, because I decided, okay, I'd hop over to the UK, see some of my family there, and then pop up to Oxford and give it a go. Try and just, meet the people there, be involved in the society. I think I'd been a member since 2016, just to kind of take a first step in being part of the wider fan community. And then, I went to Oxenmoot in 2016, and it was really nice. Everybody was like super welcoming. I got to know quite a lot of people the first time round. And I think what sort of like cemented my involvement was like really a chance encounter at the end of, on Saturday night, there's always a party. And after the party, we were all sort of like sitting around. A friend of mine she's a friend now. At the time, I didn't know her. She was playing the guitar and singing May It Be from the films. And we were all a bit like tipsy and we're in such a good vibe. And I just started harmonizing with her on the music. And again, it comes back to the music bringing me into the works and into the fandom, because like singing with her, like suddenly we just like unlocked this, this connection. And we said, okay, definitely need to come next year. We're going to collaborate on more music together. And ever since then, every year at Oxenmoot or at Tolkien 2019, the special event in 2019, we now have formed an a cappella choir and we sing together. And like that's like the big way that I got involved in the TS and kind of, got to know the people better, and therefore just sort of became, I guess, a more active part of the organization.
Yeah, great. So thank you so much for giving us kind of this small glimpse into your Tolkien fandom. We are very excited to have Sarah join us as a new host on the podcast. We are also very excited for this episode's guest, Molly Ostertag. Molly is a very talented animator who has been named to Forbes magazine's 30 Under 30. She's well known for her work on several animated series, but I specifically wanted to mention her graphic novel series, Witch Boy. They're really fantastic. But enough of me talking about our guest, let's go ahead and get right to the interview. So Molly, how were you introduced to Tolkien's work?
So Tolkien goes way back for me. My dad read me The Hobbit and then Lord of the Rings when I was really young. I think I was probably around 5 or 6, because I can sort of remember like learning to read by looking over his shoulder. It's this like foundational story for me that really is like just deep in my head as like one of the first big epic stories I ever heard. My dad did like great voices. He had an amazing Sam Gamgee voice. And so I think that that's what really made me fall in love with it to begin with. But the movie started coming out when I was in middle school. I was like, I think 9, 10, and 11 when they were coming out. And so that kind of took this like sort of almost half forgotten memory from childhood. And suddenly it was on the big screen and it had actors and it was coming out and everyone was talking about it. And that was like really exciting. And so I think that kind of cemented Lord of the Rings as just something that is like really, really deeply wrapped up in my life.
So I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball at you.
Okay.
Since you're involved in writing and animating and public creative work in a way, so there was a scholar who said that all great fantasy writers had to write their own, basically Tolkien fanfic and get that out of the way before they can actually write their own stories. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like that was true for you?
No, not at all. But I mean, I have written like literal fan fiction for Lord of the Rings, which is really fun. But I think it's interesting. I think he really did make this genre. He really invented the genre of fantasy as we see it today. And I think a lot of people did kind of like write their versions of Lord of the Rings and engage in that world. It's something I think about when I'm writing, often in a like almost in opposition. Like I look at it and I'm like, there's so much I love to this story. And then there's things I really dislike. Like I really hate the idea of orcs. I really hate the idea of this species that is all evil. And so that's the kind of thing that I'm like, I will never do that. And so I definitely like when I think about fantasy, when I think about the worlds that I'm constructing, there's certain things that I think that were set into the genre by Tolkien that I like consciously like want to write against. But I think by this point, like I'm definitely, I don't know. I don't think I'm writing Lord of the Rings when I'm writing my own stories. I just sort of approach them from a different place. I'm really in awe of, I don't know, he's such a mysterious author to me. I'm so in awe of the way that he goes about building his worlds. It feels really different than the way that I do. So I think it's, yeah, I think besides the literal fan fiction I've written, I am not writing fan fiction of Tolkien.
So I think you kind of started anticipating my next question, which is when you do think about Tolkien, what is your favorite part of Tolkien's work?
Yeah, I really love the emotional core of the stories. And I think so many people have tried to copy and tried to like make fantasy epics in the same way. And I think that they often miss something, which is there's this core of vulnerability and softness and tenderness to the story that really, really pulls me in. All of the characters are very kind of, it dwells so much on their emotions in the face of these really big events. And it dwells on their relationships and these little moments between them that are as important as like the battles and the big magic and the Ents and everything. So I really love that kind of touch where I just feel like it comes down to like, it sounds cheesy, but it really comes down to the love between the characters and how that is what saves the world as much as anything else. And so I just think like he has some really interesting morality woven into the books, ideas about humility, ideas about kind of common goodness, ideas about the corruption of evil that I don't really see in a lot of other places. And so I think that that's my favorite. That's really what compelled me to begin with. That's what keeps bringing me back to this story above other fantasy stories. That's what like often when I'm reading fantasy, I'm looking for something like that. I'm looking for some kind of view of the world that is unique. I'm not just looking for like the cool story and the cool fantasy. I'm looking for some kind of like moral or inspiration or I don't know, just like a different perspective. So yeah, I think that his views on just hope and his views on love, I think are really woven throughout the whole book. And I really love it. I really connect to it.
Yeah. So it sounds like you are looking for fantasy that kind of has that depth, something to connect to and really something to engage with more than just, oh, isn't this cool?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's funny because I love fantasy. All of the work that I make is like the comics that I make and the shows I write on all have like some element of like the supernatural or genre in some way. But yeah, I think like a lot of times when I sit down to read fantasy, I want there to be more. And I've been like recently, just during the pandemic, I've been really trying to like delve into more, like just reading more novels and like trying to find books that make me feel the way I felt when I first heard Lord of the Rings as a kid.
So comparing the experience that you're trying to go back to, what is your fondest experience of Tolkien's work?
Yeah, I've had like multiple sort of like ages of Lord of the Rings in my life. I've had being really young and just listening to my dad tell it and not knowing, if it was this big story, or like not knowing the cultural context of it at all, just being like, this is a book that my dad likes and this is something we read together. And then I had the movies and kind of realizing that like everybody loved this and getting so into the actors and the sets. And like I had all of the, DK books that were like, here's the weapons they have, here's the armor. I watched all of the behind the scenes, like, so that was its own thing. But I think like the current place that I'm in with it right now is my favorite. I got really into it a couple of years ago, watching it with my wife and feeling this connection to like specifically the characters of Sam and Frodo, and like my relationship with my wife, feeling kind of like there was something there that I really related to. And I've kind of stuck with that and just started making more and more art in the world, making comics based on scenes from the book, making fan fiction, making fan art. And that's just been a really lovely way to kind of feel like I'm entering into this world and like I'm taking part in it. And it's been very special to kind of get to feel like I'm a part of Middle Earth, or I'm contributing to it in some way. It's been really nice to just dive so deep into the story and just keep finding things that I love and things that I'm excited about.
So in talking about that experience, you focused a lot on the ability to kind of enter in creatively. But in the background, you also mentioned that part of that was bringing your wife into the world for the first time.
My wife had actually had seen them before and had they actually like got, I think their first like famous internet thing was Lord of the Rings fan art. So it was more like sitting down to watch it together, and also kind of not being like, I think we both watched it when we were pretty young, and we watched it maybe in our like early 20s, but sitting down to watch it as adults, and adults who are like in love, and also adults who are in a world that is kind of scary right now. It just added all of this context that I had never seen in the movies before. And it added this level of emotion that really, really, really sort of struck home with me. And I'm still very obsessed with.
Mm-hmm. So we've heard about, your early listening through with your dad, and then your first experience of the movies, and then kind of your more fond later experience watching it with your wife and sharing it. How do you feel like your approach has changed in those different experiences of Tolkien's work?
Yeah, I think I've definitely gotten more interested in just what I was talking about, these little relationships and the message behind everything. Like, I think for a while, it just felt like it is such a foundational feeling work, and it's so big, it almost does feel like it's a history or something. And to kind of like engage with it and to read it. I read the book. I read through all of the books for the first time in like 10 years this year. And to kind of engage with it as a creator now, and as someone who knows what goes into making stories, has been a really interesting experience, because instead of just being like, because the books try so hard to make it seem like this is a history, this is a translation of something that happened in the past. And to kind of look at that and feel this like incredible fondness for Tolkien of like, you set it up in this way and this is how you're telling the story. I'm really, really interested in when you can see him in the work and sort of starting to read it and be like, oh, I think that he really loved this character, or he loved this kind of description. And it makes me feel kind of connected to him and very interested in him in a way that I previously hadn't really like considered him very much when I was enjoying the story. I was just like, this is the story that I love. It's a fantasy world I want to go into. And now as a writer, I am really sort of like seeing insights into the person who wrote these stories.
Have you ever found yourself curious about the History of Middle Earth series, where it kind of goes into his writing process?
Yeah, I actually just ordered it way too much money from a bookshop. I'm waiting for it to get here. Because I just keep seeing snippets of different drafts, and they're so compelling to me. Yeah, I'm actually right now. So somebody posted his unpublished epilogue that he wrote. That's sort of like this conversation between an older Sam Gamgee and his daughter Eleanor. And I read it and I was really, really moved by it. I felt like it kind of changed the ending of the book for me a little bit, and it changed sort of the focus. And so I'm actually drawing this long comic about it right now that I'll probably post online pretty soon. So yeah, I definitely want to go through the History of Middle Earth and find all of those little gems. Because I think they do just give different insights into the story and different little angles of it that are really, really exciting and really lovely.
Yeah. So you've mentioned that your working as a writer. And so basically, I kind of wanted to explore that a little bit because I know that you have expressed interest in doing some kind of Hobbit adaptation.
Uh-huh.
So what draws you into wanting to adapt Tolkien?
Yeah, I'm sort of, it's a little bit of a joke. Like I'm kind of just putting myself out there because I know that there's absolutely no way it's going to happen. But I think that I just like love it. And I feel very at home in this world. And it's been very fun diving into the fan fiction and just doing it kind of just for fun and just to share with people. But I guess I'm just sort of like, I'm one of those people who can't just have a hobby. I always have to turn it into a job. So I'm like, what if I could direct this energy towards a Hobbit graphic novel or a show set in the Shire? I don't think that it will really happen, but it's kind of fun to just like put out these ideas of what it could be. I think ultimately, that like I'm very happy making my own work and kind of having that be my like original work in the world, and then having sort of fan art be a hobby and something on the side. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's interesting seeing the Amazon show happening. I mean, I think I don't know, I guess that like Tolkien has never had that adaptation before where it's like they're spinning off and making stories that he never wrote. And I'm not sure if I'm going to like the show or not, because I think I'm really interested in the stories that he specifically told. And so I think that if I actually got to do something like official for Lord of the Rings, I probably would mess it up because I'd be too nervous.
So just thinking about all that you've talked about in terms of your perspectives on Tolkien, how there are some things that you just find that you're drawn back to, but there are other things that, you kind of work against when you're writing. Do you find yourself ever recommending Tolkien, and why or why not?
I definitely do. Especially, I think I recommend it to my friends who I know are nerds and who want to dig into it. I mean, I think almost everyone I know has like read it or engaged with it in some way, because I just know a lot of nerds. And so it's more like recommending that people go back to it and look for different things. It's been very fun. I think the last year or so, I've been going really ham on the fan art. I've been really into like finding kind of the queer themes to the story and sort of what feels like these like hidden gay stories within it. And so that's been really fun to bring that out and show people my perspective, and then see people say, oh, I'm going to read Lord of the Rings for the first time because I want to see what you're responding to. I want to read it like with this perspective in mind. So that's been really cool, feeling like I'm like getting people into it. But yeah, I'm always like it's interesting. I'm always a little bit wary to recommend it because there are things, I mean, it's very long, it's very dense. Not everybody wants to read so many descriptions of landscapes. I do, but not everyone does. Not everyone wants to read like chapters full of songs. Again, I do, but like it's fair. And there's also like issues. There's no women there's very few women in the movie, in the story. There's like certain like very like racially coded and racist language in the books that is uncomfortable and like really, I mean, honestly, really upsetting. And so I absolutely never hold it against people when they do not want to like engage with this work, because I think that there's parts of it that like are very, very, very open to criticism and like very, I don't know, I just wish we're not there. I think specifically like the racial dynamics in the book, that was like the hardest thing to kind of like discover on the reread. There's not like a lot of it, I guess, but it's just like reading descriptions of the Easterlings or descriptions of orcs and being like, wow, this feels so ugly and cruel in a way that I don't associate with this author. But yeah, that's kind of like my biggest hesitancy to recommend it to people. Mm-hmm. And so usually if I have someone who's like reading it for the first time, I sometimes will be like, just FYI, like it has these problems. I don't know, I do not apologize for, or like, you cannot set these things aside. But if you go in knowing that, and are sort of prepared for that, there is also a lot of beauty to be found around it.
Yeah. Over this last year, I was reading through The Lord of the Rings with a student that I tutor. And there were certainly those times when we had to stop reading and have a talk like, okay, this part here, at the time he was writing, this is the trope that he's trying to use, but we would not use that trope today. And here's why, here's what's bad about that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's just really hard, especially when you're recommending to a younger reader to be like, yes, I fully recommend it. It's like you always have to have that little asterisk of, except for these couple parts that need a better explanation in today's world.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I think it's, I think my like modern fantasy has in so many ways, was born from Lord of the Rings, and has been people trying to write their own versions of it, people trying to write against it. I think my least favorite trope that has come out of Lord of the Rings is the idea of like evil races, basically the idea of orcs and Uruk-hai and goblins being these like entire species of creature who are sentient and can talk. Like in the book, they all have Cockney accents. It's wild, but they're still evil. And it is like the characters, our favorite characters, can kill them and still be like regarded as heroes and not have to reckon with that like death at all. That's like, and you see it in so much fantasy. You see it in Dungeons and Dragons. You see it in so many video games. And that's the biggest thing that like, as a writer, I always want to push back against, is the idea that there are just evil people or like groups of evil people. I'm much more interested in kind of the individual evil, the evil of the greediness of Sauron, or the sort of like industrialism of Saruman, or even the kind of like banal evil of like the hobbits and Scouring of the Shire who help Saruman build a factory. That's really interesting to me. The idea of like, you're just born evil and there's nothing you can do about it is, I hate it, honestly. It's very much my least favorite part of the work. And it's my least favorite thing that has like gained a big foothold in fantasy.
Mm-hmm. So the question that I like to end our interviews with is really to give you an opportunity to tell our listeners about the things that you're doing now that they can read, watch, engage with. So do you have anything you want to tell them about?
Yeah. So I have like a main Twitter account that's like more professional. And then I have my Lord of the Rings stan account that's just Hobbit Gay on Twitter. And I post a lot of fan art. I've sort of slowed down a little bit because I've had to like get back to work. But I'm pretty soon, probably by the time this is out, I'll put up a comic of the entire epilogue, the entire sort of unpublished epilogue. And I've been doing a couple of these. I think this will be my fourth or fifth comic that is like drawn directly from the book. And there's something really fun about going into the words and going into the dialogue and getting to like act with the characters a little bit, getting to sort of like show the expression on their faces as they're saying these things. Again, I've said, I really feel that there is sort of this like really tragic, like queer yearning within the story, and like within the story of Sam and Frodo specifically. And so I really enjoy finding ways to bring that out and finding the ways that it's kind of quietly woven into the text, and finding ways to bring it out visually. So yeah, I think what I'm sort of like proudest of in my like contributions to the fan community are these comics where I just take little snippets from the books and make them sort of like just draw them in my own way.
Great. Well, I'm sure that I'm not the only one who will be looking forward to that. I want to thank you so much for talking with me today and sharing your Tolkien experience. It's been a wonderful, wonderful listen.
Oh, good. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. I love to talk about it.
We are so thankful that we have such gracious scholars and fans who want to share their Tolkien experience with us and with you.
We really enjoy making these podcasts, and the fun doesn't stop here.
That's right, it continues on social media. You can find us on Facebook as Tolkien Experience and Twitter as @TolkienEXP. Don't forget to like, follow, share and comment, because we love interacting with you just as much as we enjoy talking to our guests.
For even more content and to join our fellowship of supporters, check out our Patreon by going to patreon.com/Tolkien Experience. Finally, you can also follow our personal Twitter accounts. I'm @Luke B. Shelton.
I'm @SR Westvic.
And I'm @Aaron L. Palmadill. If you have questions or comments, you can send them to us by email at tolkienexperience@gmail.com.
If you want to know more about this week's guest, We provide show notes at tolkienexperience.com. You can find the podcast on all major podcast services, including Apple, Stitcher, and YouTube. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast wherever you listen to it.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, and we truly hope that, in a way, it contributes to your own Tolkien experience.